"Clear your desk before lunch," he said on a company-wide Zoom call. That's how I found out I was fired. Live in 1080p mid-sentence in front of 140 blinking boxes. Some faces turned off immediately. A few just froze like stunned deer. And there, dead center on my second monitor, was Austin Caldwell, the CEO's over-caffeinated son, grinning like he'd just solved world hunger with a PowerPoint deck. I'm Gerald Porter, 54 years old, and I'd just been professionally executed by a 28-year-old who thought my 16 years of systems integration experience was legacy baggage. "Thanks for your service, Gerald," Austin said, making air quotes like he'd invented sarcasm. "We're pivoting toward a more agile, cloud-native architecture. We need architects who think in APIs, not mainframes." I was literally holding the Q4 compliance packet in my hand. 7 browser tabs open, regulatory portal running in the background, and this nepotistic prince decided that was the moment to make his digital transformation statement. Mid-quarter, end of fiscal year, live on camera. I didn't say a word. Just closed my folder, set my security badge on the desk beside my keyboard, and nodded once. Understood. Let me pause here because if you're hearing this and thinking what the hell happens next, you need to understand something. I wasn't just middle management getting downsized. I was the backbone of a $150 million banking compliance contract that kept Pinnacle Financial Services running. For 16 years, I'd sat in silence, built the integration protocols, tied vendor authentication to renewal workflows, and designed the attestation framework that kept federal auditors happy and money flowing. I was the guy who made sure when someone at Global Banking Consortium pressed a button, the right numbers showed up in the right places at the right time. But to Austin, I was just old school. That's what he called me once in a Slack message he accidentally sent to the wrong channel. Jerry's solid with the legacy systems, but he's kind of old school. Not great optics for our digital transformation narrative. I replied with a thumbs up and archived the message. Even saved a screenshot, just in case. So on this bright Tuesday morning, Mr. Digital Transformation decided to show Daddy he could swing the axe without permission, cut the dead weight, prove he could modernize without asking the board. Never mind that I was the designated systems architect legally named in the contract. Never mind that my biometric authentication was the only access point for compliance attestation. Never mind that every vendor integration flowed through protocols I'd authored, tied to clauses he'd clearly never read. Austin had his moment, and I let him have it. After the call ended, I stood up slowly, like I was coming out of anesthesia. Around me, the office had gone quiet. Not the normal quiet of people working, but the uncomfortable quiet of people pretending they hadn't just witnessed something that made them all realize how expendable they were. My desk was already clean. I don't keep personal items at work. Just a coffee mug that says documentation saves lives and a folder labeled Exit Contingency 12B. I'd learned that lesson from my father, who spent 30 years at General Motors before they restructured his entire division out of existence. "Son," he told me, "always know where the exits are and always have your paperwork ready." I pulled out the folder, flipped to the first page, and took a picture with my personal phone. Then another, just in case. 3 contracts, each over 50 pages, all with my name in bold ink next to terms like designated systems architect, primary integration authority, and sole attestation signatory. Legal language is boring until it isn't. But you know what's not boring? The part that says any change to the designated architect must be client-initiated and undergo 90-day regulatory vetting with external audit review, which means they couldn't replace me without triggering a client-led compliance audit. That little detail was going to matter more than Austin's entire digital transformation strategy. I walked toward the elevator, and something interesting happened. Nobody looked at me directly, but I caught people watching from the corners of their eyes. Not with pity, exactly. More like concern. The kind of look you give someone who just got hit by a truck, but you're starting to wonder if maybe the truck took more damage. Sarah from accounting gave me a subtle nod as I passed her cube. Jim from vendor relations actually stood up, like he wanted to say something, then sat back down. These weren't people feeling sorry for me. These were people who knew exactly how much of the company's daily operations ran through systems I'd built. I walked out without saying goodbye. Nobody made eye contact in the hallway, not because they didn't care, but because they did. This wasn't the kind of place where senior people got terminated in public. Hell, we'd had junior developers who'd leaked source code get better send-offs than that. But I wasn't angry. I wasn't hurt either. I was calculating. In my car, I connected to my phone's hotspot, opened my personal email, and typed 9 words to our client's compliance officer. Change of systems, architect notification per contract, section 12B. Hit send, closed my laptop, put on my sunglasses, and drove to the one place Austin would never think to look. The business center was in a strip mall between a nail salon and a tax prep office that had been closed since March. Executive suites available, the sign said, though executive was doing a lot of heavy lifting. It smelled like burnt coffee and broken dreams, but it had Wi-Fi, a locking door, and most importantly, no Austin. Porter Systems Consulting. I'd registered the LLC 3 weeks earlier, right after Austin's accidental Slack message. Call it paranoia or experience, but when someone accidentally tells you they think you're not great optics, it's time to start planning your exit strategy. Because Austin hadn't just fired me, he'd fired the only person who could legally maintain a $150 million financial services integration platform. I spread out the contingency folder on the rented desk. Pages 18, 23, and 31 were already marked with yellow tabs. All 3 contracts had my name embedded in the technical specifications like digital DNA. The important one, the contract we called Big Bank internally, had section 12B that nobody ever read carefully. Designated systems architect Gerald Porter, verified, validated, and non-transferable without client compliance approval. This wasn't a technicality. This was financial regulation. You mess it up, you don't just lose a client, you trigger federal audits, freeze transaction processing, and risk getting blacklisted from banking integration work. That contract didn't say a systems architect, it said me, with my certification number, my digital signature, and my biometric hash. I'd written that language myself, buried it in subsection 12B during the original contract negotiation. Austin's father, Richard, had been in those meetings, nodding along as I explained the importance of continuity provisions and designated authority protocols. He'd signed off on everything, trusting that his compliance guy knew what he was talking about. He was right to trust me, just not in the way he thought. I logged into the secure backup I'd maintained for exactly this scenario. Not on company servers. Those credentials died the moment HR processed my termination. This was my personal insurance policy, a complete mirror of every integration schema, audit trail, and authentication protocol I'd built over 16 years. My father had taught me about redundancy during his 30 years at GM. Son, the company owns your work, but they don't own your knowledge. Keep your own records, because the day they don't need you, you better be sure you don't need them. I downloaded the latest integration schemas, compliance workflows, and vendor authentication matrices. Saved them to an encrypted drive that lived in my home safe, right next to my passport and birth certificate. Everything backed up, everything documented, everything legal. Next, I sent exactly 1 email. No drama, no accusations, no corporate speak. Just subject, section 12B status change. Body, due to organizational restructuring, my position was terminated effective today. Per contract specifications, client notification required for systems architect transition. Please confirm receipt and advise on continuity protocols. Signed it with my new business email, gerald.porter@portersystemsconsulting.com. Attached nothing. Let them ask. I leaned back in the rental chair and listened to the hum of a vending machine in the hallway. They had no idea what they'd done. Austin thought he'd fired some old-timer blocking his AI transformation. What he'd actually done was yank the only certified engineer out of a financial system that processed real-time transactions for 3 major banks. The role wasn't transferable without background checks, regulatory clearance, and, most critically, client approval. That's why I didn't fight. That's why I didn't argue or demand an exit interview with HR. They were irrelevant. They didn't fire me. They just removed the only support beam from a very expensive, very regulated tower and walked away whistling. Meanwhile, back at Pinnacle, the first cracks were already showing. At 2:30 p.m., Derek from procurement tried to process a routine vendor payment. The system prompted for quarterly attestation confirmation. He clicked proceed and got a red screen, awaiting designated architect approval. He tried again. Same message. Derek called IT. Hey, the payment system is asking for Gerald's approval, but Gerald doesn't work here anymore. Yeah, we know, said IT. "We're working on it." Except they weren't working on it because nobody understood what it actually was. At 3:45 p.m., the banking consortium's automated monitoring system detected an irregularity in the compliance chain. Nothing major, just a routine check that usually got resolved in minutes. But when it tried to ping the designated architect for verification, the response came back as user not found. The system did what it was designed to do. It flagged the account for manual review and sent a notification to Global Banking Consortium's compliance department. Integration architect access anomaly detected. Manual verification required within 72 hours per regulatory protocol. That notification landed in the inbox of Margaret Stevens, Senior Compliance Officer, at 4:12 p.m. Margaret had been doing banking compliance for 20 years. She knew what integration architect access anomaly meant. It meant someone at Pinnacle had messed up something important. She forwarded the alert to her supervisor with a note. "This needs immediate attention. If Pinnacle's architect is unavailable, we have a Section 12B violation." By 5 p.m., my phone buzzed. Not from Pinnacle, from the client. One line. "Gerald, received system alert regarding architect access. Can we confirm your status for Q4 attestation review?" I didn't answer yet. Let the silence do its work. Saturday morning, I was drinking coffee and reading the news when my personal email chimed. Not from Global Banking Consortium this time. From Janet Murphy at Pinnacle Legal, sent from her personal Gmail account at 7:23 a.m. "Gerald, hope you're well. Quick question. Do you happen to remember the override procedures for Section 12B architect substitution? Having trouble locating the documentation. Thanks, Janet." I smiled and saved the email without responding. Janet was smart enough to know this wasn't a documentation problem. This was an "oh shit, what did we just do" problem. By Sunday evening, 3 more emails had arrived, all from different people at Pinnacle, all using careful language, all asking essentially the same question: how do we fix what Austin broke? Monday morning arrived with the soft sound of corporate panic. No alarms, no sirens, just the quiet desperation of people realizing they'd kicked the wrong hornet's nest. At 8:15 a.m., Pinnacle's IT team tried logging into the compliance portal to process the weekly attestation batch. System response: unauthorized access. Primary authentication required. Authorized user: G. Porter. Tommy Brooks from IT called his supervisor. "The system won't let us in. Says we need Gerald's biometrics. Gerald doesn't work here anymore." Yeah, that's the problem. At 8:22 a.m., they attempted an override. What they discovered after 5 hours of security ticket escalation was that I hadn't just used the default company setup. I'd built a custom authentication tier with hardware token verification and biometric confirmation. My face, my fingerprint, my access codes, all gone and all required for the system to function. The irony wasn't lost on me. Austin wanted to modernize everything, but the ultra-secure biometric system he was so proud of in board presentations was now locked behind the face of the man he'd just fired. Procurement was next. Derek tried to approve a vendor payment for infrastructure licensing. Red screen, awaiting quarterly attestation confirmation. Without it, the system defaulted to processing suspended. Suspended meant frozen. Frozen meant vendors weren't getting paid. By 10 a.m., finance was in full crisis mode. Multiple payouts stalled. Integration protocols frozen. Internal systems flagging manual override required. Manual override meant explaining to CFO Rita Brooks why half their financial infrastructure was bottlenecked behind one missing checkbox, which only I could check. Rita called an emergency meeting for 11 a.m. Present: Austin, legal, IT, finance, and notably absent anyone who actually understood what I'd built over the past 16 years. "Walk me through this," Rita said, her voice carrying the kind of calm that makes smart people very nervous. "Our entire compliance system is locked behind Gerald's biometrics?" "It's more complicated than that," Austin started. "Make it simple." Janet from legal cleared her throat. "Gerald designed the integration architecture with multi-tier authentication. His credentials are embedded at the foundational level. We can't process quarterly attestations without his specific authorization, and we need quarterly attestations because the banking consortium requires them every 90 days. Without them, they can freeze processing and trigger audit review." Austin leaned forward. "But this is just a software problem, right? Can't we reprogram the system?" The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Tommy from IT spoke up. The authentication protocols are hard-coded into the integration layer. Gerald built them as immutable security features. Changing them would require rebuilding the entire platform from scratch. How long would that take? Assuming we could map all the existing integrations? 6 months minimum, maybe a year. Rita's coffee cup hit the table harder than necessary. We don't have 6 months. We have until Friday to provide Q4 attestations or the banking consortium triggers their non-performance clause. At that exact moment, Rita's assistant knocked on the conference room door. Ms. Brooks, you have an urgent email from Global Banking Consortium. The email was brief and devastating. Subject, Q4 attestation status. Pinnacle Financial Services Team, our automated monitoring has detected irregularities in your compliance chain. Per contract, Section 12B, quarterly attestation is due within 72 hours. Please confirm availability of designated systems architect Gerald Porter for immediate verification. Failure to provide authorized attestation will result in processing suspension and mandatory audit review. Austin read it twice. They specifically asked for Gerald by name? That's what the contract says, Janet replied, pulling up Section 12B on her laptop. The designated systems architect as named shall retain exclusive attestation authority for all quarterly compliance reviews and integration certifications. Substitution permitted only through documented client-initiated transfer with 90-day regulatory validation. So we can't just assign someone else, not without client approval and a 90-day vetting process. And if we don't provide attestation by Friday, they suspend all processing and withhold Q4 payments pending audit review. Rita did quick math in her head. Q4 payments from the banking consortium represented $47 million in revenue. More importantly, processing suspension would cascade to other clients who relied on the same integration platform. They weren't just risking one contract, they were risking the entire business. At 12:15 p.m., Rita made the call everyone had been avoiding. Gerald, this is Rita Brooks from Pinnacle. I was in my business center office, eating a sandwich and reading technical documentation for a new client prospect when my phone rang. I recognized the number but let it go to voicemail first. The message was professional, controlled, and desperate. Gerald, this is Rita Brooks. We have a situation with the compliance platform and could really use your help. Could you give me a call back when you get a chance? Thanks. I waited exactly 1 hour before calling back. Rita, Gerald Porter returning your call. Gerald, thank you for calling back. We seem to have an issue with the attestation system. The banking consortium is asking for Q4 compliance verification, and the system is requesting your authorization. I see. The thing is, we're having trouble accessing the protocols you set up. Wondering if you could walk us through the override process? I could hear the strain in her voice. Rita was smart, professional, and had always treated me with respect. She was also clearly trying to solve a problem that Austin had created without actually acknowledging what Austin had done. Rita, I appreciate you reaching out, but I'm no longer a Pinnacle employee. I can't access company systems or provide technical support without a formal consulting arrangement. A pause. What would that look like? I'd need to review the scope of work, assess the current system status, and provide a proposal for remediation services. As an independent contractor, how long would that take? I looked at my calendar. I could have a proposal to you by tomorrow morning. But Rita, you should know, the banking consortium contacted me directly yesterday. They're aware of the situation. Another pause, longer this time. They contacted you directly? They did. Seems they're interested in discussing continuity options for their compliance requirements. That was when Rita realized this wasn't just a technical problem. This was a complete shift in the power dynamic. I'll call you back, she said, and the line went dead. Tuesday morning, 9 a.m. sharp. The Pinnacle boardroom lights flickered on, and every executive who still thought this was fixable got their reality check via conference call. The banking consortium had joined, not account managers or relationship coordinators, but their chief compliance officer, Margaret Stevens, and senior legal counsel. They weren't here for relationship building. Unless Q4 attestation is completed by close of business Friday, Margaret said, without warmth, we'll consider the contract suspended and begin vendor review with alternative providers. It was the corporate equivalent of a loaded gun on the conference table. Austin, now looking less like a tech visionary and more like someone who'd just learned his parachute was decorative, cleared his throat. Let's not overreact here. We're bringing in a replacement architect. Shouldn't be an issue to get sign-off by end of week. He said it like he was offering expedited shipping. Margaret didn't blink. Mr. Caldwell, Section 12B specifically designates Gerald Porter as systems architect. Any substitution requires our written approval and completion of 90-day regulatory validation. None of that has occurred, but that's just continuity language, right? Legal formality. No, Margaret replied with the patience of someone explaining gravity to a flat earther. It's federal banking regulation. Gerald Porter is the only authorized signatory for your compliance attestations. Period. Silence. Then Rita Brooks, the CFO, leaned forward with the expression of someone calculating exactly how much this was going to cost. You're telling me that the only person who can authorize $150 million in active processing is the man we terminated on a company-wide video call? That appears to be correct. Austin's phone buzzed. Text message from his father. Conference room, now. The banking consortium continued. We've also been in direct contact with Mr. Porter regarding continuity options for our compliance requirements. He's indicated willingness to provide attestation services through his consulting firm. That sentence landed like a nuclear bomb in a library. Richard Caldwell, CEO and Austin's father, had been sitting silently in the corner, watching his son's digital transformation initiative collapse in real time. Now he spoke for the first time all day. Margaret, what exactly did Gerald tell you? That he's available to fulfill contractual obligations through Porter Systems Consulting, subject to appropriate commercial terms. And if we don't engage him, then you're in breach of Section 12B, we suspend processing, and we begin procurement review with other vendors. Gerald has indicated he'd be willing to work directly with us during that transition. The room went completely silent. Austin looked like he'd been hit by a truck. Rita was already calculating severance packages. Richard Caldwell looked like a man who'd just realized his son had accidentally burned down the family business. At 2:47 p.m., my consulting proposal hit their inbox. Clean, professional, and non-negotiable. Porter Systems Consulting LLC, Compliance Remediation Proposal. Scope, Emergency Q4 Attestation Services and Ongoing Compliance Architecture Management. Terms, $42,000 monthly retainer, 6-month minimum engagement. Direct client relationship authority. Exclusive intellectual property rights to existing protocols. Payment terms, net 15. Proposal valid for 48 hours. The number wasn't arbitrary. I'd researched market rates for senior compliance architects with banking industry clearance. $42K monthly was exactly what someone with my credentials and client relationships should be earning. Rita called me at 3:15 p.m. Gerald, it's Rita. We've reviewed your proposal. And? It's approved. When can you start? I can begin remediation immediately upon contract execution. I'll need DocuSign completion within 2 hours to meet the Friday deadline. Done. At 3:52 p.m., the signed agreement appeared in my inbox. I uploaded the attestation authorization to the banking consortium's portal with a brief note. Consulting engagement confirmed. Q4 attestation authority revalidated. Processing resumption authorized. By 4:30 p.m., the frozen systems unlocked. By 4:45 p.m., vendor payments resumed. By 4:58 p.m., the banking consortium's confirmation hit Pinnacle's inbox. Q4 attestation received and approved. Processing normalized. They'd survived. Barely. But this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something entirely different. Within a week, 2 other financial services firms had reached out to Porter Systems Consulting. Word travels fast in banking compliance circles, especially when someone demonstrates they can build systems so integral that removing them breaks everything downstream. Within a month, I was managing compliance architecture for 4 major clients, all of whom preferred working directly with me rather than through intermediary firms. The institutional knowledge I'd built over 16 years wasn't just valuable, it was irreplaceable. Austin quietly transitioned to strategic innovation research, a newly created role with no direct reports, no client contact, and no authority over anything that mattered. He spent his days writing white papers about disruptive fintech solutions that nobody read. Richard Caldwell called me personally 6 weeks later. Gerald, I wanted to apologize for how this went down. Austin was trying to modernize, but he didn't understand what you'd built. I appreciate that, Richard. The thing is, we've realized how much we depended on your expertise. Would you consider coming back? We could match whatever you're earning now, plus equity. I looked out the window of my new office space. A real office this time, with my name on the door and a view of the harbor. Richard, I'm not an employee anymore. I'm an architect. I build systems that work, and I work with clients who understand their value. I understand, but I appreciate the call. The banking consortium offered me an exclusive 5-year consulting contract the following month. Other firms started approaching me directly, bypassing traditional system integrators entirely. The professional respect that had been taken for granted for 16 years was now something I commanded, not something I hoped for. I never planned for revenge. I planned for professional sustainability. I built systems so solid, so integrated into the business fabric, that removing me wasn't firing an employee, it was demolishing infrastructure. The difference between vengeance and architecture is simple. Vengeance destroys, but architecture endures. When you build something right, with proper foundations and careful documentation, it becomes indispensable. And when someone tries to tear it down without understanding what they're doing, the structure itself becomes your defense. I didn't climb back up their ladder. I built my own foundation, and now other companies come to me when they need systems that work. Because in the end, it wasn't about getting even. It was about building something that lasts.